With all that went down during Avengers Infinity War, we all know by now that time travel is finally going to be introduced to the MCU. There were many surprising scenes in the Avengers Endgame trailer, but perhaps most shocking of all was the appearance of Scott Lang. Some people think he was appearing in the past, but we'll let you know why we think he's safely in the present. While watching the trailer for Avengers Endgame, many Marvel fans were expecting the highly anticipated Captain Marvel to show up at some point, but at the end of the trailer, we got an even bigger shock when we saw none other than Scott Lang waving happily into a security camera. Seeing an unmasked Ant-Man in the trailer was a huge shock, since our hero's fate seemed to be hanging in the balance at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp. Before Scott embarked on his journey to the quantum realm, Janet Van Dyne warned him to be careful of time vortexes. This remark was easy enough to dismiss at the time, and we saw Scott enter the quantum realm, but unfortunately for him, all of his cohorts disappeared when Thanos snapped his fingers at the end of Avengers Infinity War. As far as we knew at the time, there was absolutely no way to get out of the quantum realm unless you have help from someone outside of it. That's kind of a major plot point during Ant-Man and the Wasp, and the reason Janet was trapped in there in the first place. Prior to the Endgame trailer, we thought it would be impossible for Scott to escape the quantum realm on his own. But now we're forced to question it because at the end of the trailer, Black Widow and Captain America are watching footage of Scott Lang, apparently outside of the Avengers headquarters. This led many fans to wonder whether this footage was being shot in the current day or if our heroes were viewing footage from the past. Is it possible that Scott Lang traveled through a time vortex and is now trapped in another point in time? Plus, earlier in the trailer, we see Bruce Banner looking at images of people who were lost in the snap, including Shuri, Peter Parker, and Scott Lang. This seems to suggest that Scott's currently missing. We hear Steve Rogers ask if they're watching an old message, and Natasha Romanoff replies, "That's the front door." But does she mean that it's the front door at that moment? Or old footage from the front door? Some might argue that the Avengers headquarters is relatively new, and that's true, but the building has been around for much longer and used to belong to S.H.I.E.L.D. Couldn't it be possible this was filmed back when this was a S.H.I.E.L.D. facility, long before the Avengers moved in? If Scott managed to escape from the quantum realm himself, it seems likely that he did so by utilizing a time vortex. If that's the case, what are the odds that it would have spit him out perfectly in the present day? There's even a couple of other factors that make some fans believe we're seeing an image of Scott Lang taken in the past. If you check out the top left corner of the screen, it clearly says the word archive, which could mean this is archival footage which was taken at some point in time. Next to the word archive is something that looks familiar to a date. Now, archive is clear, but this is a bit more difficult to decipher. Some fans believe that it reads 1983, which, as we're sure you know, is a date many years in the past. Scott using the time vortex to travel into the past is just one possible theory. Some fans think that he may have actually ended up traveling into the future using a time vortex, where he encounters his daughter Cassie Lang, who's now grown up. At this point, Cassie may be able to help send her dad back into the past in order to undo the actions of Thanos, but it's possible she overshoots the mark and he ends up going too far in the past. Time travel can be pretty finicky, if the Back to the Future franchise has taught us anything. Regardless of how Scott went back in time, it's not hard to see why he would have been trying to do so. He may have been trying to get a hold of someone who works at S.H.I.E.L.D., which isn't very hard to believe. His pal, Hank Pym, was once a consultant for S.H.I.E.L.D., and the brilliant Howard Stark was a founding member. S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters is a perfectly sensible place for a superhero time traveler determined to change the future to go. Now, when you look at all this, it doesn't seem too far-fetched to think that Scott Lang actually ended up at S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters in the past, and that Captain America and Black Widow found some archived footage of the occasion. But let's look at all of the supposed evidence for this theory a little more in depth. First of all, we have Black Widow explaining what happened at the end of Infinity War when Thanos snapped his fingers. Who's she talking to? This isn't Deadpool, so we're assuming she isn't breaking the fourth wall and talking to us. We see her in the room with Captain America, but there's no reason she would be explaining all of this to him, since he was right there with her when everything went down. During a shot where we see her speaking about Thanos, she seems to be wearing the same outfit as when she sees the footage of Scott. If this is true, it seems very likely that the person she's explaining the events of Infinity War to is Scott Lang. This makes sense because Scott Lang Lang wasn't involved in Infinity War and was trapped in the quantum realm while half of all people disappeared. Also, when Scott is speaking to the camera, he talks about the events of Captain America Civil War and mentions meeting Black Widow and Captain America at the clash of the Avengers. Scott says he encountered them a few years ago, which leads us to believe that it's the present day. Now, Scott may not be the smartest guy in the entire universe, but let's give him some credit here. Do we really think he could have traveled all of the way to the Avengers headquarters from wherever he was previously and not notice that he's about 30 years in the past? The world has changed a lot since then. Just think about simple things such as gas prices and the types of cars you would see on the road. That's not even getting into how the specific landscape of the area has likely changed, or the fact that the building he's standing in front of says Avengers on it and not SHIELD. You don't have to be a genius like Hank Pym to figure this one out. You could argue that Scott thinks he's in the present day and truly believes the airport fight was just a couple of years ago. But this seems pretty unlikely, all things considered. We just don't think Scott would be oblivious enough not to notice that he was decades in the past. With this in mind, let's agree that if Scott was in the past, he would be aware of this fact. Well, if he was aware of it in 1983, he would know that not only has the airport fight not happened yet, but Captain America would still be frozen in the ice. Name-dropping a superhero everyone thinks has been dead for decades isn't very impressive, and definitely wouldn't get him access to SHIELD headquarters. Again, we just don't think Scott is that dumb. And let's talk about Captain America's response to seeing Scott and hearing him say that he met them at the airport a few years ago. Cap asks if it's old footage, which seems like a strange thing to say if this is taking place right after the end of Infinity War. If that was the case, then Captain America Civil War did indeed take place a few years ago, which would make Cap's reaction seem rather odd. Many fans believe that Avengers Endgame will take place following a time jump for several reasons. There have been set photos floating around of a much older looking Tony Stark, and we saw a casting call looking for someone to play an older version of Cassie Lang. So not only is Scott not in the past, he's actually a few years in the future. Traveling decades back in time would make the difference in your surroundings pretty noticeable, but a few years in the future might not have the same effect, especially considering that the snap would have likely delayed the release of new technology, infrastructure, music, and much more, which would offer clues about what year it is. If anything, it seems more logical that this part of the trailer takes place a few years after the end of Infinity War, and not in the past. Another possible explanation for Captain America's old footage comment would mean that this scene takes place in the present day. As we saw earlier when Bruce Banner was looking at people presumed dead due to the snap, he looked at an image of Scott Lang. It makes sense that after the catastrophic events of Infinity War, the remaining heroes would want to gather any remaining allies, and that includes Ant-Man. So it's likely that Black Widow and Captain America already looked up Scott, saw he was reported deceased, and were confused to see him on the security camera. Then there's the word archive and the possible date of 1983, which shows up on the footage. The word archive doesn't necessarily mean this footage is ancient. It could simply mean that the recording is being archived at the time, or that the viewer has the option to archive it. And if you look closely, it appears as though the date actually reads ISO3. This could be some sort of technical indication, the name of the camera which is filming, or something else entirely. But what it definitely isn't is a clear indication that this is taking place in the past. Also, if Scott was in the quantum vortex, which was located in the back of the van, how did he travel through time and get the van back? It looks exactly the same as it did in Ant-Man and the Wasp, so we're guessing it's the same van and not another one. Are we to believe that this van looked the same in 1983 as it does in present day? Surely the van itself didn't travel through the quantum realm and into a time vortex. We know that Scott getting out of the quantum realm all by himself and possibly going through the time vortex is uncharted territory in the MCU, but this is a little too far-fetched. If the access point for the quantum realm was in the back of the van, it stands to reason that the van itself couldn't have passed through it. Even if the footage was recorded in the past, what reason would Captain America and Black Widow have for watching it now? With the whole half of all life in the universe thing going on, we're guessing they're pretty darn busy. It doesn't seem like the time to be going through years and years of security footage from decades in the past. Also, if Scott did travel through the past in order to show up on this old security tape, then where is he now? If this video is showing Scott in the past, It raises a ton of new questions and makes the current situation even more complex. But now let's talk about the fact that this is a Marvel movie trailer. Here at CBR, we love Marvel movies, and we get as excited as anyone else when a new trailer drops. But we also know that not every single aspect of a trailer ends up making it into the final movie. Just look at this scene from the Thor Ragnarok trailer. Remember when Hela encounters Thor in an alleyway and then crushes Mjolnir while standing there? No, neither do we, because it didn't happen in the movie. The actual scene from Ragnarok was quite different from the trailer. Do you remember when the Hulk was running around in Wakanda during the trailer for Avengers Infinity War? That didn't actually happen in the movie either. Oftentimes, we can see clues about how the movie will play out by studying the trailer, but other times they can be downright misleading. Even if the footage in the trailer was meant to show Scott in the past or in the present, there's a solid chance that could change by the time Endgame actually hits theaters. Heck, for all we know, this scene might not even make it into the final cut of the movie. While it seems likely this footage was filmed in the present timeline, we'll have to see the movie to find out more. What do you think about the trailer for Avengers Endgame? Are we way off base? And is Scott really appearing in the past? Or have we managed to convince you he made it to the present? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. And don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more MCU content. Thanks for watching.